I just want to thank everybody that came up and introduced themselves and told me their story. And I really want to be there for you guys. We have 14 days together. Actually, we have until Friday of this week, and we have until Friday of next week. And it's going to be really helpful. I feel that we can do the best if you guys look at your courses and things of that sort on your own time, when I'm not here. But when we're here, let's really spend this time engaging so that you can ask me anything about your journey and how we use values, goals in this straight A guide concept. You could ask me anything about how we used this concept of having the right mindset at any time and at wherever stage you are in your life. I want you to be thinking about, looking forward and having its never quit mentality. You can't quit just because you're wearing orange jumpsuits. You can't quit just because you're facing a sentencing hearing. You can't quit just because there's a pandemic and 40 million people unemployed and crisis going on around the country. We've got to invent ourselves. And we do that first by defining success. We set clear goals at different stages of the journey. And we're all, advancing. It's all about this incremental stages. Where we are right now is not where we're going to be in a year. It's not where we're going to be in 5 years. The goals we set today are going to put us on the pathway. If I'm like Zay and want to have a community-based organization, or I'm like Johnny, who I just spoke to, that wants to teach people how to paint, right? It's going to be, how do I build a pattern that helps me get there, that helps me get that story? How do I be different from everybody else who's in jail? And I will always say, I wish that I was the one that could say I've got all the answers. I could say I learned from leaders, and I learned from the people you've read me write about. I've learned from Shlomo Shmuel in his book, The Right Mindset. I've learned from leaders like Brandon Coluccio and Never Quit Mentality, Looking Forward. I've learned from John Doyle, who teaches me about 9 innings. And I read these guys all the time because they help me grow stronger, and they can help you grow stronger. The lessons, we can apply their lessons to our life right now. Yesterday, you heard me say that Steve Jobs said, a good artist copies ideas, a great artist steals ideas. Well, we were all in jail or prison, so it's normal for us to steal ideas from leaders. Let's steal ideas from leaders that can help us overcome. And all of them teach us about this concept of we've got to always be assessing ourselves. You know that the prosecutors are assessing you. You know that a judge is assessing you. You know that case managers in there are assessing you. The question is, how willing are you to assess yourself? So in that assessment tool, if you guys haven't gotten it yet, I'm really going to ask again them to print it and give you the assessment tool. Because what the assessment tool is it's a 100-point scale. There's no right answer or wrong answer. I just want you to be thinking about, when you're setting goals, what does excellence look like? What is the difference between somebody who achieves and somebody who only talks about wanting to achieve? Because Johnny, I can tell you, I know you want to be a painter. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But there are a lot of people that say they want to get out and contribute to the making of better lives for kids. But then they find it's much harder than they think. And Zay, there's a lot of people who say they want to build these community-based organizations. We've got to learn from the people that have done it. And what did they do differently? And I can tell you, it's that 3-legged stool. It's making sure I've created the strategy and documented it, making sure that I've created my own tools and tactics, making sure that I'm measuring my progress. And yeah.
So going back on that, when you were talking about you gotta sell yourself and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's part of like doing that too, because you gotta, like, when you say you still gotta eat even though you're giving out stuff, you gotta sell yourself to the organizations that helping you out, so you can be able to eat at the same time, because you gotta have money for all that at the end of the day. So if you're giving free stuff away, you still gotta have money in your pocket still. You feel me?
You
Like,
still have to pay your bills, right? You still have to
Yeah.
be responsible. So that's what we learn about, Zay, in having this mindset. It said, I know I'm going to have these challenges, but do I know how I'm going to solve the problem? If I know how I'm going to solve the problem, I'm way ahead of the game. That's the one step. That's my strategy, right? The strategy is, okay, this is how I'm going to define success. I'm going to define success if I've done it. Then I'm going to say, here's the strategy, here are the problems I got to overcome. So you got to kind of architect that. You got to engineer your way to do that. You can do it. And you know one thing you'll learn, in the course that you guys will study on your own, there's this story that the author wrote about building Las Vegas. Do you know who built Las Vegas?
the Jews.
It was actually a couple of criminals. It was Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, organized crime. They started it. But you know how they started it? They did the same thing that you had. They had an idea. Then they had to sell the idea first. They had to sell the idea to raise capital that would allow them to build buildings. And eventually they said, someday, right now it's only a desert, but someday I'm going to bring people in here, movie stars and people that want to come to this community and gamble. And it all started with an idea. You guys have ideas. You guys have to learn how, not only you, we all have to learn, okay, that's what success is. You've defined success. Let's create the pattern that's going to help you execute on that goal. That's what I hope you will learn from this course. That's what the clear goals are. So, did you have something else or can I go on?
I'm good.
All right, brother. Hey, Zay, appreciate you, man.
Yes, sir.
You be thinking about success every day and you'll make it happen.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I would like you guys, when you get it I'm going to send it again in an email. Mr. Johnson already has it, but I don't know if you guys have it. Show of hands. Have you guys have a copy of the assessment tool? No. Okay. I will send, after follow-up today, I'll send an email to Mr. Johnson so that he will print it and send it to you. But then I want you to do me the favor of work through it on your own. And that means you've got to fill it out. No answer is right. No answer is wrong. But if you use that assessment tool, you're kind of putting yourself on the pathway to building that three-legged stool that I told you about. And you need to be thinking about, how do I get that strength so that I can make an argument to the people I have to convince later, right? And we all have to convince different people depending on what stage we're in. So we only have 30 minutes left today. And I'll be around, if you guys will stick with me, I can stay. I don't know how long Mr. Ellis or your team will allow you guys to talk, but I'll be around a little bit after if you want to have a little more one-on-one. But I'd like to talk about goals in 3 different stages. Before you're sentenced is one. And I know that I think it was Brian that talked to me about, it was David who talked to me about wanting to get ready for sentencing. So I want to talk with him in a real live way about how I would have used this strategy before sentencing. And then I'd like to talk about it after. We'll do that for about 10 minutes or so. And then I want to talk about it after sentencing. And, maybe that would be somebody else that wants to communicate that. I don't know, somebody. And then I know that then I want to talk about it after release. And I know that Johnny has an idea for that. So if we could first of all bring up David, who I spoke to, and we're going to talk about how do we use this concept before we are sentenced. And so David, I thank you for coming up, brother. You look at that camera, and that way I can see you right at you. Okay. So I'm going to ask you, you've been in jail, you said, walk me through it again, for 3 years, right?
Well, I actually got arrested offshore.
Okay.
I was arrested back in 2017 in Costa Rica.
I was in Costa Rica.
I was detained there for 15 months, and then the feds brought me up here. And in total, I've been detained now for 3 years, for 36 months.
Okay. And you're getting sentenced soon. Is that right?
I was just informed yesterday I should be sentenced probably in July or August.
Okay. And you had a question for me about that, correct?
Well, what I'm interested in right now is trying to approach the court in a way, that I'm not taking away or trying to make excuses or anything like that towards what I've done. Immediately upon being arrested, I accepted, I've accepted responsibility. I think that a lot of the change that takes place during incarceration has to do with acceptance. And so, after taking that step, I've made a lot of, I've done a lot of work since then to try to better myself. And what I want to do is I want to be able to present that to, in a way to the court to try to get the best possible sentence.
Can I tell you what I learned in that book, The Right Mindset, about something like that, and what I use and what I still use and what I think relates directly to these concepts that we taught yesterday and today before sentencing, which is where you are right now. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tell you, and I don't know anything about your crime. I don't know anything about, all I know is what you've just told me. You accepted responsibility. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to tell you how we start this in the context of values and goals and having the right mindset. It starts, David, with not thinking about you, as difficult as that is. How does the judge think about this? Because a lot of times people in jail and prison, I was one of those people. You're different from me. You already say, I get it. I accept responsibility. I didn't do that. I made every bad decision a guy could make. Okay? I tried to lie. I took the stand. I committed perjury. I was still involved in crime when I was in jail. And it wasn't until I was after sentenced that I learned these lessons of saying, hey, I've got to change my life. So I think you start off by saying exactly that. I start by looking at the judge. And the judge, like the probation officer that we spoke about earlier, he's in this business, right? This is very personal to you, right? Yeah. This is your life. It's very personal to you. But to a judge, he's going to be very much influenced by the prosecutor and what the government has to say.
And their recommendation.
Now, you've also got a lawyer. And the lawyer, the judge knows, it doesn't matter who you are or what you did, the lawyer is going to advocate for his client. That's the lawyer's job. So who's the most important person there? It's you, David. It's you. If you're a defendant and you're going before sentencing, I got to think from that concept, values and goals and mindset, and how do I get rid of it? And the first thing that I would do is I would not be talking about myself. I would be talking about the victims. That would be the first thing I would say. And I'm going to give you an example of how I would say it in my story. If I could do it over again, this is what I would say. Your Honor, I made some really bad decisions, and I know that I hurt a lot of people because of my decisions. I know that I broke the law. And in this country, the laws are meant to protect everybody. I didn't have a right to break those laws. But because I broke those laws, I made a victim of every American citizen. And I didn't realize that while I was doing it. But I do now. Because while I was in prison, or since I've been in jail, I've had a chance to change my mindset. I've had a chance to really look at what a democracy is all about. And I know that I failed. And I acknowledge that, and people were hurt. So I could speak about this for 10 minutes, just about a victim. I could write about it for 10 minutes. Who are the people that were hurt? Because when you're doing that, you're showing you're not only thinking about yourself, you're thinking about who was hurt. For a drug offender, that person might say, well, it was just consenting adults. We all knew what we were doing. There are no victims. Maybe your PSI says there's no victims, right? But that's not important. What's important is not your perspective. It's the system's perspective, the judge's perspective. So I'd start from that concept of saying there are victims. If it's a white collar crime, right, and there was financial loss or something like that, there are victims and they suffered. And the judge wants to know you've thought about that. Because most of the time, David, people who have the wrong mindset, they're only thinking about themselves and how they're going to miss their kids and miss their wife, and they found Jesus. And although those things are true, that doesn't change the needle in a judge's eyes. The judge, you want to differentiate yourself, and so you start by thinking about the victims and the people that were hurt. Then you think about something else. And you say, okay, I have to use this concept of values and goals, and what am I trying to do? I have to show the judge now, what did I learn from this experience?
Okay.
Start with the victims. What did I learn from this experience? So now it goes back to this whole concept, again, of how did I get here? And you want to talk about what did I learn from this? Because I didn't set out to break the law. I was raised in this kind of a family. I had this kind of a background. You know, Hancock, one of your people in the unit, has told me about the difficult life he has, and he can't seem to get out of this system. So he's got to talk, if there's ever, God forbid, a sentencing date for him, but even for you or for anybody, you've got to talk about, how did I get here? Because the judge wants to know that. He knows the prosecutor is going to say one thing. He knows the probation officer is going to say one thing. He knows the lawyer is going to think. What he doesn't know is, what are you going to say? And he wants to know that you've really thought about, how did I get here? Yeah. What were the influences? Where did I go wrong? What happened? What did I learn? So that's a second prong of this approach. There's a third prong, and it's going to be not only the victims and the loss, not only how did I get here and what did I learn from this experience, but here's the final one. What am I doing to make things right? And so now you want to close out with talking about how you've been participating in classes, what books you have read, what books have influenced the way that you think, what you've learned from the right mindset, or what you've learned from whatever books are changing your mind, right? Change the way you think. You've kind of re-engineered and rethought your process. And you tell the judge that, and now you're kind of solving one of his problems. I don't want to give you leniency or mercy if you haven't learned from this, because you need to spend more time in jail or prison. But if the judge can see, okay, I know the purposes of punishment, and you've identified with the victim, you have empathy for your fellow human being, and you respect law and order, and you've taken some work, the hard work on yourself in figuring out, how did I get here? Where did I go wrong? What can I do better? And then you've architected a plan to make things better. I think that's what I believe helps you show that you're not only asking for mercy or leniency, but you've worked to do what? What's in the book? Earn freedom.
Earn your freedom.
I think that's the best. We can't change the past, but you can show, I've changed my mindset and I'm different. And that's why I'm going to ask you to have mercy on me.
Well, and that you've spent time identifying what brought you here.
Yeah.
And the changes that you've been able
Those
to make.
introspective programs,
to overcome
that's what I get out of this. And that's what I think in these questions that are part of this book and part of the PDF, they should help you articulate that story.
That was so helpful. That's exactly what I was looking for. Just a little bit of direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David, for giving us this time. So keep participating as we continue these weeks. So that's like how I want you guys to think all the way through this. That's the way I would use these tools before sentencing. But I'd also ask you to remember, even if you're getting sentenced now and you may be going to prison for a long time, if you watch the videos in my course, you're going to see that I've interviewed guys that had life sentences, but because they implemented these changes in mindset, because they never gave up and they were always looking forward, they changed their outcome and they actually persuaded authorities to let them out. And I interview guys that were serving life, but they're home now. And that happened because they always said, it's never too late to move the needle. It's never too late to change my mind. It's never too late to change my life. And then they start building a record and creating a new story. And that's really our Nature Tomorrow's class about attitude. But now I'd like to turn to the second segment, and I'm going to ask somebody to come up who's going to talk about, let's talk about how do we use this after sentencing. And then we'll get to Johnny, who wanted to talk about after release. So is there somebody that wants to talk about this using these concepts after sentencing? Well, what you do when you go to prison after you've been sentenced, and how do you use this? Any volunteers? Because we can work through it together. Come on up, man. 10 minutes, brother. 8 minutes in the hot seat. There we go. Thank you for coming up, my man. Hey, I appreciate you coming up, my man. What's your name, brother?
Matthew.
Matthew, thanks for coming up.
Yeah, no problem.
So have you been sentenced already?
Yeah, I'm already 2 years into a 3-year sentence.
So you're on the other side. You're almost getting out.
Yes, sir.
So do you have any questions or do you have any ideas, one or the other? Either you have ideas of how you would use this concept of defining success and setting very clear goals now that you've been sentenced and you're on the other side. How would you use these? And if you don't know, then I'd be happy to share with you some thoughts that I have.
Well, I mean, I come to programs and I got my GED, and so I want to help younger children. And so I feel when I get out, I want to go back to school. I'm gonna go back to college, and I have a 11-year-old child that I used to coach before I got incarcerated. I coached him in 4 different sports, so I figured I can get into that when I get out, not having to go to college or anything, and then just go from there, really.
So are you serving, your name again?
Matthew.
Matthew. So Matthew, are you serving the entire sentence right there at the Mecklenburg County Jail?
Yes, sir.
So you don't have to go to a prison?
No, sir.
So talk with me about how do you use, now that you know that the sentence is behind you and you've got clarity on a release date, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So could you tell me how you would define success between now and when is the release date?
April 22nd, 2021.
So April 21, how can you define success between now and what will be different between now and April 21st, 2021? What is different?
I guess just educating myself a little more on, certain things. I've been trying to read because I want to do like psychology or criminology or something like with criminal justice. So I've been reading like some psychology books. I guess success would just be just learning more about what I want to do when I get out, trying to master it somewhat to what I, to an extent that I can while I'm in here.
How many months is it? So we're filming this in June. So it's about 9 or 10 months, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Here's the concept of success as pertains to you, Matthew. I would look at this after sentencing. We're not only looking at after sentencing, of course, we're looking at it, how can I use this time between now and the day my sentence ends to position myself for the success I want to have from 2021 to 2030, say, right? For 9 years after. Excuse me. If I think of it in those terms, I can start using this approach that I learned from John Doyle in 9 innings and say, okay, I got 9 innings. In the first inning, I'm going to do this. So when you say, I want to read books on psychology, that's very different from converting that into a very smart goal. A smart goal would be very specific. It would be measurable. It would be action-oriented. It would be realistic, and it would have a timeline associated with it. Right. So you're very clear. You have about 9 months to go. So I'm going to ask you, here is a task, a smart goal. How many books do you generally read a month?
2 to 3.
2 to 3. So you know that success for you could say over the next 9 months, 9 innings, okay, I'm going to say read a minimum of 18 books. That's 9 times 2, right?
Right.
Okay, let's think about this further. Specific goals, smart. So now I just made it specific. I'm going to read 18 books. So maybe a goal for you before we finish this class is to see if you can name those 18 books that you're going to read. Now that's specific and you've got them written out. That's one step. Measurable. Did you do it? Every month you can measure whether you have done it or you didn't.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Now you've got a goal. It's specific. If I read 18 books, I know that I'm going to be more likely to succeed than if I don't read 18 books. Is that right?
Right.
You've identified this is important to me. I want to learn about psychology. I want to learn about how people think. I want to learn about what motivates people. I want to keep people out of jail and prison.
Right.
Very specific. These are 18 books that I think will help me measure it. Either I read 2 books every month or I didn't. And if I didn't read 2 books this month, that means I have to read 3 in order to stay on track. It's action-oriented. I have to read it. It's realistic. It's something you can do, and it's time-bound. You could measure it over the 9 months you have to serve. You could measure it every month. You could measure it every day. But you could even do more than that, Matthew. You know what else you could do?
What's that?
You got your GED. Congratulations on that, by the way. I know that's a big accomplishment to do in an environment where it's tough to learn.
Right.
Okay, but you did it. You've accomplished a goal. Here's another goal with regard to those 18 books. This is something that I used to do when I was in prison. Every time you read a book, every time, because you've already read a lot of books,
Right.
but I'll bet you don't remember all the books you read. You've read so many. Is that right?
Well, I write them down in my book.
You do. Well,
Sir.
you're very far ahead of most people then. But here's something. Do you write a book report?
No, I don't do that.
So here's something you could set a goal of doing. You could write every time you read one of these 18 books. I would encourage you guys and write this down. If you've got a paper, here's a goal. Every time you read a book, write down the name of the book that you read, like you just told me that you do, Matthew. Right? Answer 3 questions. 1, why did I read? Let's just say, I can tell you one of the psychology books that really helped me when I was inside, it was called Flow.
Okay.
Why did I read Flow? And I know why I read Flow. I read Flow because I read a review in the New York Times that told me this book would help me understand human motivation and human behavior, why we make decisions, why some people have the energy to keep going and other people give up. It's always because they're not after success. It's the process that drives them. That's why I read Flow. 2, second question that you want to answer is, what did I learn from reading Flow? Okay? Then I would write a paragraph or 2 paragraphs on that answer. And then 3, how will having read Flow help me upon my release? So those are 3 questions you could answer. That's very specific, but more importantly, I want you to understand of what you get if you do that. Remember when I told you that I got out and I went to see a probation officer and I showed them all the books that I wrote?
Right.
If you go out and you want to use this tool to help you launch your career or your business of helping people or even helping your daughter, right? You can show her the very methodical step you took. And you can say, these are the 18 books that I read during my last 9 months. This is what I learned from them. This is why I wrote them. Let's go through this as an exercise. And now you're not just talking about it. You're actually showing how you did it. That's how you become more authentic and you build credibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So Matthew, thank you so much for coming up. I want you to go forward with the right mindset. We only have 9 minutes. Keep participating as we go. We got another 2 weeks.